Sarah, we're back.
Hi, Nicole, how are you?
I'm actually really excited because I found that like self-touch up tool on Zoom.
Right? I had no idea.
Well,
This is
and
like,
I didn't have any idea either, except that today's guest clued us in on it, which is so cool because these podcasts are not only available everywhere you listen to podcasts, but you can actually watch us in action on YouTube.
you can if you want to see all the craziness.
And we're looking good. Smooth.
Yes, we are. You can touch up yourself through Zoom. This
Yeah,
is
it's
amazing.
crazy. I mean, the things you learn through our podcast,
I
it's
know.
insane.
I know. Lessons for a lifetime.
Well, it's actually like a perfect way to start an episode on self-forgiveness because why do we even need to touch ourselves up? You know what? I'm going to take the touch-ups off.
I'm
I'm going to
not
be who
going
I
to, if
am.
you don't mind.
You're going to keep it on.
I'm going to keep mine on, but you can take yourself.
Oh
I
my
mean,
God.
it's been a rough couple of days. I'm a little tired. Just
You know,
gonna.
okay, I hear you. And so why has it been so rough?
Oh, we don't have a long enough episode to cover
How
that.
about can we do the next episode on why Sarah's life has been so rough?
No. How about if we maybe after this episode, I may be transformed because we're going to talk about self-forgiveness, the power of self-forgiveness and self-acceptance. So let's discuss after this. Maybe the transformation will have taken place.
Yeah, the
So
goal for Sarah to reframe what's going on. Well,
so
in order so
yeah.
yeah, we've been getting requests from listeners to cover all kinds of topics, and one is self-forgiveness. And the first question will be like, why are we so freaking hard on ourselves? But
Yeah.
as we bantered a little bit about this, we realized that it might be best to try to bring in an expert, somebody who both has studied this topic and has some possible tactics for people to apply. And it
Yeah.
just so happens that one of our very own community members, a woman who's actually been on my other podcast, Run This World, is just that person. So let's welcome Melissa Wolak on the show.
Well, hello. You ladies look fabulous, by the way.
All
Is
the
that the
Zoom
first
sisters.
step? Is it like
So done.
complimenting is the first step towards self-forgiveness?
Yeah.
One of the first steps towards self forgiveness is kindness and compassion. And we do this for others all the time. But our inner critic, that inner judgmental dialogue, can be harsh on the inside, right?
Mhm.
We probably wouldn't talk to other people the way that we talk to ourselves. And it's something that I have observed as a healthcare provider and a coach and a trainer for the past 25 years. I have sat in my office and I have listened to people just be so cruel to themselves. Right? I should have done this. I can't believe I was that stupid. Why did I drop that ball? I can't believe that, right? It's just the litany
Mhm.
of criticism can just go on and on. And it is heartbreaking, right? And then, though, you sit there and go, oh, wait, do I do that? Right? When I look in the mirror, do I go, girl, you look rough today? Right? And that's so mean. Would we say that to our child or our spouse? Maybe joking, like if they needed a little support, and like, whoo, I slept horrible. Yeah, love, you're looking a little rough. I get it. Right. But we wouldn't just go, wow, you look like crap. We just wouldn't come up with that.
I
But
mean, there
it's a
are a few, maybe my bestie. We could
maybe,
say that. But
right? But
but
out of concern, like, girl,
yeah.
you look like you are exhausted. What's going on? What do you need? Do you need some good chocolate? Do we need to talk? What we got going on? Right. But we don't really do that. And I think women also, from what I know about the mind, I'm a total brain geek. I love to study the brain, and I've done a lot of One, my bachelor's and master's are in communication science disorders. And so, really big on brain and how we talk to others and ourselves. And women have this, we have a really strong sense of responsibility. And part of that is we all hear about fight, flight, and freeze when we get stressed or threatened. But there's another response that we don't always talk about, and that's mend, tend, and befriend. And if we think about how our race is still around, it wasn't because people fought and ran away. It's because we engaged and took care of everyone so everybody could be okay and stay safe. So women's minds are actually wired to make appropriate plans, to worry, to come up with solutions, to take care of people. And with that, even though we don't have the same stresses that we used to have hundreds of years ago, we have a strong responsibility sense to ourselves. And we don't want to let people down because long ago, that meant people wouldn't survive.
That all makes so much sense. What really it also kind of gets my mind wandering in the direction of like, how did you get to the place where you're passionate about learning these things about women? What happened in your journey to land you here so that we can learn from your lessons?
Oh, good question. So, I have I've done personal work as far as support, I've been supporting my clients. I have a lot of women. I get to see frequent patterns, but I also have an old habit as far as overgiving, people pleasing, overgiving, taking it to an extreme, right? That's why overachiever, overgiving. We're going overboard. The whole idea that we can give, that we cannot give from an empty cup is a fallacy, right? We can totally give from an empty cup. It isn't good for us, right? Like it is going to hurt us, but we can do it. And so I experienced that after a while, I was just getting more and more depleted. And here I am giving it work. Then I became a mom, right? At one point, my lifetime, I trained for a marathon. I've done these different things. And there was so much external calibration, like me checking in on what was happening in the outside world and not checking in on what was happening in my inside world. And what I have along this journey, I was diagnosed with celiac. And women are, when we look at the celiac numbers, when we look at the people who are diagnosed, and many go without being diagnosed, but 78% of the people diagnosed with autoimmune issues are women. I
I didn't
know.
realize that. Is that like why is that?
There are multiple reasons, but I do think we hold on to stress so much more, right? It affects our heart health, it affects our sleep, and it affects our digestion. And over time, if we don't listen to our body, it wears us down. And I was one of those people. I started just wearing myself down. And that's where I started to incorporate in my work and in my personal life. Let's invite all our parts into the conversation and collaboration because I was trained to focus on the mind and the brain. But I was like, wait a minute. I am missing this whole piece with people. What about their body and their heart and their soul?
Yeah.
We can't leave those out or we're out of alignment.
Yeah, that is such a good point. And with this topic in general, we tend to think of, the idea of self-forgiveness as a mental or emotional, concept. But when you talk about it as from a holistic approach, it does make more sense because our bodies are reacting negatively in, say, a physical way, even if we think this is an emotional problem. So it is tied together.
It is, because if we cannot forgive ourselves, it starts to affect our physical body. It adds stress. It starts to affect, like I mentioned, our heart, our digestion. We start to get much more defensive and protective. And then it starts to affect what is so important for us, and that's our connections, our meaningful connections and relationships with ourselves and others. So when we forgive ourselves, we are actually improving our relationships with other people. So, ladies, I get it. If you can't do it for you, do it for the people that you care about around you. If you need a better reason than for you, which I would love that we forgive ourselves for our own purposes, but it does create an energy and a connection that's more positive if we can do this for ourselves. And we'll talk about how. I know we're going to get there.
Well, I'm sort of interested in maybe working through an example, maybe with one of us. I don't know.
Sure.
Maybe we can
I'm
share
like,
something.
you just offered yourself up for the guinea pig.
Well, I
Nicole.
thought maybe I was offering up one of you too.
I can totally give an example. I think Sarah has already said, so this is when I'm going to pull the compassion card. So Sarah's already said, I'm feeling a little overloaded, right? So we're
Yeah.
not going to throw you out there, Sarah.
Perfect. I'm like,
So
I don't
this-
think I have much to give right now. Yeah.
Right. So this is when we're going to go with compassion. And I really think, one thing to keep in mind here is that you are worthy of forgiveness. You don't have to earn it. You are enough. You don't have to prove anything. Like, yes, we want to take responsibility for our actions, but we want to be careful that we don't take over responsibility for our actions. So I'll give a little example here that maybe some people can understand. First of all, so my husband the other day, I've been up for 3 hours, right? So I've already taken the dog for a walk, gone for a run with my daughter, made her pancakes, made me breakfast, right? Like I've done all these things, and he kind of rolls down. And he's like, well, and I told my daughter, I was like, hey, babe, today is an in-person learning day. Let's change out of the sweaty running clothes. And because I'm thinking, I don't want my kid to be the smelly middle schooler, right? Like, I mean, it's been a crappy year as it is. Let's keep this to a minimum here. And he was like, well, you're still in your sweaty clothes. Maybe you need to change. I think she's fine, right? And I was like, do not mess with me right now. She needs to change her clothes. And right, like, and no one's gonna see me. And I'm not in middle school anymore. Right? Just back off.
Fighting words,
Right? Like I just snapped. And if you talk to my husband and my daughter, and people can't see, but I do have a breathe sign behind me. I'm a big, deep breather and I stay pretty calm, but I just lost it. And I snapped at him. And my daughter was like, did I do something wrong? And my husband was like, like, so he got into the defensive and he's ready to snap back at me. Right. And then I feel bad because my daughter we don't argue very often. And so then she's kind of freaked out, and she's a big hearted, sensitive being. And so I'm looking at both of them like, oh, geez. Right? Like, ugh. And we've all done this, right? Like you just snap and you're like, are you kidding? You have no idea what I've been doing this morning. And I have taxes to do as soon as I get you both out of here. So just zip it. And so, I looked at that and I was like, okay, hold on. Because then I felt guilty. And I think that is an issue for all of us, right? We react, we snap, something happens, we don't meet a deadline, we say something not nice, we don't complete something, right? We drop the ball, whatever it is. And then we feel horrible and we feel guilty, like we've done something really awful. And then that can lead to shame. And shame is even tougher. Like with guilt, we can kind of course correct and say, okay, let's see what we need to do now. But shame starts to get really emotional and deep, sort of sinks into our heart and our bones a little bit or a lot. And so in that moment, like then I felt bad. My husband and daughter, they leave. And I'm like, okay, now I'm still holding on to this. And I knew my husband was too. So first I was like, I've just got to accept, right? Like I was feeling a little overextended and honestly underappreciated. Right. So we've all been there, right? A little appreciation, recognition goes a long way. And so I was like, where does that need to come from? That needs to come from me. I'm like, you got a lot done. You are human. Your reaction was a little big. What are we going to do about it? Right. And so I was like, okay, I'm just going to send my husband a text. I know my husband, he doesn't really want a phone call. He doesn't really want to talk yet.
So was he in the same house when you were sending him this text?
No, he was gone. He was gone. But I might, because he really like after something like that, he needs his space,
Mhm.
right? And recognizing that, like, I'm ready to talk. Like, oh, let's talk about that. And he's like, no, we're not going to talk about this, right? And I'm like, okay. So, but I knew for me to forgive myself, I needed to one, like accept my behavior, recognize where I was coming from, right? I was feeling like, whoa, I've got a lot of things to do. Please do not pick on my dog walking clothes right now. And don't undermine me telling our daughter to change her clothes. Right? Like, let's talk about it later, but let's not do it right this second. Right. And so I, I was like, all right, I'm going to accept that I didn't do it appropriately. How can I change that? But I'm still going to be nice to myself about it. Like, that's okay. And it's important that we finish the loop. So, what I mean by finishing the loop is that we don't let ourselves flounder in the guilt and the shame of it for too long. Right. So that's why I was like, oh, I'm already texting once I sat down and moved through this, because then we can get sort of stuck in that spinny thought world where we just keep going around and around. And either we make ourselves feel really bad or then we start to blame the other person and get really mean.
Yes, I'm relating totally, especially to the whole parenting, conundrum where you walk into a situation and you might say something and the person who was the active parent had said something else and there's no way for you to have known what they were going to do. So it just creates this like, ugh, and then it just builds on all the incidences that have happened over the past lifetime of parenting. And you walk away going, I don't even know if I should be married anymore. I mean, literally, it's like it's so sensitive. It touches these like really deep chords. So yeah, I can see how too it goes from this like internal finger pointing, and then it could easily take a turn towards finger pointing to the other person.
Yes, because we get defensive, right? So one, we get guilty and the guilt and the shame feel so cruddy that then we want to minimize that as much as possible. So then sometimes we can go into a blaming space like, okay, well, I'm going to get this off of me because these feelings are uncomfortable and hurt. So now I'm going to throw them on you. Right. But more so, what we want to do is be patient with ourselves and go, we are human. And we are going to make mistakes and we are going to react. And sometimes we're going to overreact. And sometimes we're going to be hurt. And sometimes we are going to hurt someone else. And if we can, like, accept that we're human and that's going to happen. What are your thoughts, Sarah?
Well, I was going to say, what are your thoughts when there's not another person involved, right? So really the person that you're letting down is yourself. So the example that we received of someone asking us to talk about this was, I think they were upset with themselves. They maybe had set some personal fitness goals. Um, or we see weight loss goals all the time. And there's this idea that there's an expectation that we've set for ourselves, and then we don't meet it, right? So maybe we didn't run as fast as we thought we were going to this training run, or I haven't lost the weight that I thought I was going to lose. I think, that kind of blame, self-shame, anger, terrible self-talk happens to us all the time, and there's not necessarily another person involved. What are your thoughts on how you handle and I don't know, a scenario like that?
Oh, that's a great scenario to give. Um, Once again, you know, I think it's important that we check in on what was the intention with that goal, right? Was our intention to feel more fit or to feel more strong? Or were we trying to prove something to ourselves or to someone else? Right. And there is no wrong answer, but I think it's a good idea to check in. Right. And once again, if getting ourselves perspective, like we think about if our best friend had made that goal or our child had made that goal, would we go, wow, you're lame. I can't believe you didn't run that as fast as you said you were going to. Right? Like checking our language, right? Because we will go, wow, I am really not being nice to myself right now. And it's okay. I don't want us to bypass the emotion with that. It's okay to be frustrated and disappointed and even sad. I tell people to do these ABCs of mindfulness, right? And A, to acknowledge how you're really feeling, and B, to breathe and be with it. And then C, let's make choices on how we're going to feel and do better. Right. So if we go through this scenario, and I know when I ran my marathon, um, I started out and I was training with the men actually on this marathon. So I was rocking it. I was doing really well. Not that women don't run fast. That's not what I mean. But I was able to keep up with these very fit gentlemen and this other very fit woman. And I was feeling so good about myself. And then I started to break down. I got bursitis in my hip and bursitis in my knee. And then I needed to get orthotics. And I started getting slower and slower. And I couldn't run with them anymore. And then the physical therapist was like, wow, I don't know if you can run this marathon. I was like, oh, by golly, I'm running this marathon. I'm crawling on my knees, right? Like, what are you
Right?
talking about? Right? And this was before I did some of this work. So I'm talking to old me as well here. And so it was like, all right, well, you know what? If you still want to do this, how are we going to do it? I was like, all right, well, I may need to do the walk running. I can't remember
Right.
what that protocol is, but it's the walk run. And
Yep.
I may have to let go of the time for this one. Like, what is it that matters to me? And for me with that marathon, it was actually one, I really had always wanted to do a marathon. I've been a runner and I thought that would be a cool thing to do. I also was raising money for diabetes because my dad has diabetes and has since I was born. And so I was like, okay, what are the intentions with this? Right. And I felt some pressure because I was running this in Hawaii, and 5 of my friends had already bought tickets to
Oh,
meet
wow.
me in Hawaii to cheer me on.
Oh my God.
Right. So I'm like, okay, I've raised this money and I'm doing all of this. And it was like, all right,
Mhm.
well, you could do the half. right? You could just bump it down and do the half. And I was like, all right, I'm going to keep checking in. And in the end, I did run the full marathon. I did do all the things that the physical therapist and everyone had told me. Um, and the time was not at all what I had hoped it would be. I let it go and I gave myself compassion and kept what really was important in mind. But I didn't go, Listen, I can't believe you're so slow. That's ridiculous, right? Like that stinks. Why bother? Part of your mind wants to do that. But when you drop in and you're like, well, what's my intention? And my soul and my heart really wanted to raise the money and wanted to share this experience with people who loved me and also did. Like, I really wanted to run a marathon. Right? So
Yeah, that's like a major accomplishment. Well, and
it takes acceptance of where you are, right? Sometimes you don't choose the circumstances, right? Like your knee hurts, the weather's bad, you just don't feel good that day, right? Something happens and it's accepting, right? The situation and not beating yourself up for it.
well, I think there's a big difference between what we expect. We set these lofty goals for ourselves at times. And well, I want to do this. And especially there are a lot of women that, and men as well, but a lot of women, there's, you know, runners and things like that that have big aspirations. We want to do a lot of different things. And so it's like, well, we can do them all at one time, right? While hopping on one leg, right? And then it's like, oh, wait, oh, I can't. This happens, that happens, whatever it is. So I definitely think there's, and sometimes we set our goals and our aspirations without really having like a lot of information to back it up, right? Like, oh, well, I saw this person did this, so I should be able to do that as well, right? And without saying, well, actually, it takes a long time to train for a marathon, right? So there's a solid commitment level and these kinds of things without really understanding what it takes to meet the goals that you set for yourself. So um, I think it's a good point that you bring up with kind of understanding. Well, what did you want to do? I mean, you still completed a marathon. You ran 26.2 miles in one. Like, I don't want. It's not one sitting and one running.
Right. One run walking. Let's call it
Right.
jog walking. Right. It
Right.
wasn't quite what I would have, like my mind goes, that wasn't as pretty as I would have liked to have done.
Yeah.
But did I do it? And was my goal and intention there? And I think that's where we come in with the compassion. And we also want to be realistic, right? Like, how does that fit in your life?
Right.
Sometimes your child will get sick, right? Like, oh, okay, well, that I'm not going running on my 10-mile
Right.
training run today because my child is vomiting. Like,
Right.
okay, it doesn't mean I'm lazy, but a lot of women will go to that, right? When they rest, when they
Yes.
nourish, when something changes and they have to step back, then they're like, you used the word, Sarah, and I love that you did. You should on us, right? Like you use the word should, but I
Yeah.
should, right? And right
Mhm.
there, as soon as we use the word should or have to, guilt is going to come at us.
Yes.
And we keep thinking we can do anything. We can. I believe that we can do anything we really, really want. It may need to be modified to fit our lifestyle, our body, what works for
Right.
us, but we cannot do everything at once.
And I think that's, as I've gotten older, that's one thing that I've realized, right? When I was younger, I could sort of just hammer it home and I could work as many hours and I could run as many miles and I could do all these things. I didn't have any kids. I could, whatever. And then I had one kid and then got a little hairy and then I had two. I was like, oh hell, this isn't going to work out. And then, and then you start to age, or your body gets, things just aren't the same. Right. And so these expectations that I think I have for myself, to what you just said, something that I go to all the time, this idea of being lazy, right? Like, oh, or irresponsible, right? Oh, I couldn't do this. I'm just so irresponsible. And my mom, I'm very close to my mom, and she'll be like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't think you're irresponsible. I don't think you're whatever it is, but that is what I put on myself all the time. When I think about these things, is like, oh, well, you should have been able to do that. Why didn't you? But I think one thing as I've gotten older and had gained more perspective was, um, again, checking that idea of, well, yes, it feels like I should be able to do this. But in actuality, in reality, um, is it, is it feasibly possible? Can you do it? So rather than beating yourself up for like, oh, hey, I was lazy and I didn't do that, it's like, well, actually, it's not even possible to do all the things that you thought. It's that expectation checking, I think, that's so important, of like, well, was I really supposed to be able to do that, or did I just think that I was supposed to be, And then I think it's what you say about the shame is so interesting, because it's so hard to work through all of that. Shame is something that nobody wants to talk about, right? So, what it's funny, because even as you talk about, running a marathon, walking a marathon, there's a little bit of that, like, well, I didn't really run at all, right? Like, and maybe I don't want to put that on you if you're not. I know
But
I've
it's
thought
true.
that
You
before.
caught that.
I did twice. You did it. Yeah, you did it
Yes.
twice. And I was like, she's like apologizing for run walking. Like, and that is, I mean, that's some people, that's the only, I mean, I worked for Run Disney. Everybody run walked. Let's be honest. We were like the slowest marathon in the world. And there was nothing wrong with it, though. Look at all these people. Like, I've never run a marathon. I'd be happy to walk a marathon. Like, I don't think I probably ever could be able to do that, but it's just interesting, this level of should,
Yes. But
and
my expectation was
yeah,
that I would run the whole thing and I would do it in less than 4 hours,
right,
right? That was my expectation. And if that's fast to you, great. If that's slow to
yeah,
you, great. For me, that would have been, that's where I was lined up to be.
yeah,
And it didn't happen that way, right?
right.
But then again, I was like, glad I didn't get taken away in an ambulance, which a couple people did because it was July in Hawaii and it
Oh,
was
right.
intense. It was the
Wow.
Ironman marathon course.
Oh, wow.
And so that thing's freaking hard. Anyway,
Yeah,
Nicole knows what I'm talking about. But it's interesting, right? Even now, I am doing my best to be compassionate to myself when I say that, but you heard it, right? Like,
mhm,
oh, because my expectation was somewhere else and I
yeah,
had to change it. I mean, I really had to change it. I could
right,
not physically, it wasn't that I was lazy. I could not
right,
physically have done it. And so, if we can give ourselves that compassion, right, that I would
yeah,
give to you, that I would give to Nicole, that I would, I started to, and I know people wanted tools, and I'm going to come back to this again because one of the tools I started to use and that I give my clients is do that check in. How would you talk to your best girlfriend, the sister you really like and get along with, your daughter? How would you talk to her about this? What language would you use? Because that gives us a little space and perspective. Because if our mind is left unchecked, it will be critical and judgmental. It will.
yes,
It's the negativity bias. Our brain is just wired to go to the negative first, but we can train it to be more kind and compassionate. And this is one strategy to do that, right? And no, like I'm going to learn from this. And to also start being a little kinder in your expectations, right? Like, look at your calendar. Is this even possible?
Right.
And do you really want to do it?
Right.
But that forgiveness piece, like, that's when we really come back to our heart and go, wow, I am not talking kindly to myself right now. I don't deserve that.
So the first thing when you realize that you're in that negative cycle of guilt, shame, negative self-talk is somehow figure out how to step back and do the check-in.
I think the first thing is just to go, okay, what emotions am I actually feeling right now? Right? I do feel guilty. I feel frustrated. I feel irritable. I feel completely overwhelmed. Right? Like, just name it because it needs to be acknowledged. It's like that elephant in the room that keeps growing in the corner. If we don't acknowledge it, it becomes so unbearable and uncomfortable. Right? So just let's name it. And then we
Like
can
it.
accept where we are. And then we can look at, whoa, okay, you know what? I goofed, right? Like, I didn't get there. I didn't do what I wanted to do. That stinks. I'm really bummed about it. So now what's my next step? Right? Why did that happen? Like, what can I do? Is that goal still really resonating with me? Okay, well, then let's look at how I could support myself better to get that goal instead of beat myself up for not getting the goal. We're wasting a lot of energy, right? We don't need to waste energy beating ourselves up because then we've taken it away from what we do want to make happen.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
So there's this podcast that I reference in literally every episode. Nicole's
Yes.
laughing. We did this podcast on how to keep showing up, right? So, right, Nicole's laughing because she's like, God, how does she find a way to
I was
put
like,
it
is it going to be the mindfulness one or the
that one
persistence
too?
one or the
Persistent.
keep showing up?
It's
It's the
persistence, the power,
persistence.
like every time. There's just a new way every time. But it's an interesting, it's so applicable to everything. And I bring it up again because um there's this idea of being able to just keep showing up in what you're doing. And so rather than having to meet every specific goal that you're wanting or your expectations are here and you haven't met them, it's this idea of come to the table every day and do it. So um for an example, I've been injured for like a long time and I keep trying to come back to run and work out and then I don't and it's very shameful and it's upsetting to me or whatever. But I was on the Peloton today. So I bought a Peloton because I was like, yes, I'm going to get back. It's low impact. It's all this. Well, 2 days after I was on the Peloton, my back starts hurting. And so I had to like, Nicole's laughing. I was like, are you kidding me? How is this going to happen? How is it possible? This is happening. But so in the meantime, I've had to teach myself about foam rolling and I've gone to the chiropractor and I've done this step and that step. And like today is the second day that I've been able to get back on the Peloton. And she said, the instructor said, um, she's like, you're here today. That's all that matters. It doesn't matter. You don't have to impress me. You don't have to impress all the people on the leaderboard, whatever it is. Like you showed up and that's kind of a big effing deal. Right. So we were there so I think it's important to bring it in here with like getting to where you want to be doesn't necessarily always mean you're hitting the goal that you've set for yourself, but can you get to where you want to be? Even just showing up sometimes is something that you should, I think, be thankful for that you've done and be kind to yourself because yes, I'm not here. Yes, I didn't run my 4-hour marathon, in low in a crown, but you did it. You showed up and that kind of a thing. So I just wanted to, have a gratuitous throw in of our persistence.
There, so people can go back to that way.
That.
And I think it's so important. And that's why I mentioned the intention, right? Like, what
Yeah.
is your intention here? And really, I would like to add to the keep showing up, but it's like, keep showing up for yourself and nourish
Right.
yourself and your intentions,
Yes.
right? Like, keep doing that, right? Like, how am I okay? I have a client and we started with her on the bike 2 minutes, 2 minutes a day. I was like, all that really matters is you get that cute rear end on that seat. And now,
Right.
and she sometimes has back problems. We were like, all right, then what are we going to do to support that? And she was like, well, like you mentioned, foam roller. We started Pilates, little physical
Yeah.
therapy. And I was like, that's all part of this experience, especially as we get older. It's a joy. Our
Yeah.
bodies are different. And how are we nourishing and taking care and really like honoring this body, this heart, this soul, because we
Right.
keep evolving and changing. So having the same expectations of ourselves when we were 20 before a different career or children or marriage or divorce or whatever it is, right? That's not fair. And once again, it's not kind. Like, we want to
Right.
keep
Like
coming
where
back
are
to this
yeah.
person right here.
And where are you at that time? Because I mean, back in the day, I mean, I kept trying to be the person that I was before. Oh, well, I can run however much, this and that. And every time I did that and I would try to come back, um, I would get hurt. I'm injuring myself. I'm out again. And so finally I was like, this sucks, but here's where I am, right? Like, check to my should. I was like, this is where I am. I
And
can't do
that's the
anything
acceptance piece, right?
else.
I am going to
Yeah,
accept where I am now.
totally. That's exactly what it and it's funny you say that about your client. And it's embarrassing a little because I own like a women's running brand. So, I used to run all the time. Now I'm like, I feel like I'm a fraud in some ways, but I literally have to commit. I was like 10 minutes. I can do 10 minutes and then let's see if it hurts. Right. And that was like, it's hard. It's really hard to accept that. I mean, I've played every sport in the book, like that running and working out is my thing. So having to accept that, like, hey, you can't do what you did before. Hey, this is where you are, it has been very difficult. But I think by doing that, then I can say, okay, well, here's where I am. And here's the little tiny goal that I set and I met it. Okay, well, what does that look like tomorrow? I have all these. Today I was telling myself in my brain, oh my God, you're going to be running a half marathon by the end of the year. And I was like, that's probably not going to really happen. But, those are the things
But
that
it could. And if it
maybe,
doesn't, it's
but probably not.
okay.
Let's be
You
honest,
know,
Melissa. It's
but,
probably better.
well, and why would you want to run the half marathon, right? Like, that's when we go, why do I feel like I'm being a fraud if I don't do this? Because you know
Right.
what? I think you're being even more real to say, I am passionate about running, so passionate that I would love to be out there running that half marathon, but
Yeah.
my body doesn't really want to do that right
Yeah.
now. That is authentic. That's compassionate. And that's that message of, all right, ladies, right? This is
Where we're
this is
at.
where I am.
Yep. And there's something freeing about that, I think, once you accept. And I will say uh, there's the last few years for me have really been a point of kind of breaking down to like, when you hit that point in your life, I'm sure I know both of you have been there before and you're like, okay, this is where I am. It's not where I want to be, but it's where I'm at. It's like meeting yourself where you're at, accepting who you are, and then saying, okay, well, where do I go from there? And I really think you can get somewhere good once you do that, because then you're really working with real expectations. It's not, well, I should be doing this and I'm not there. Like, well, that doesn't work. I'm here. I want to go here, but let's deal with reality. And maybe we can get there a little faster, or at least less painful, right? Like it's less emotionally painful if you can really acknowledge where you're at and where you want to go realistically, you know?
You know
Right.
what this is like reminding me of? It's kind of probably a good time for us to start to get our final messages in, but it's when you go to a therapist and they're like, "So, what's the problem?" And then you say it and they're like, "Okay, so what's the problem with that?" And then then you have to dig deeper. And then they're like, "Okay, so what's actually behind that?" And you're like, "I hate you. Why are you making me analyze all the way to the final like center of the,
We're
universe?"
going to the root. We're going to
Yeah.
the core.
So we go to the core, and that's kind of where I feel like we've gone with this discussion, which is we started by talking about the top layer, which is this forgiveness piece, so that we can move ourselves on and find freedom, which is a word that I think Sarah just mentioned. And, but really, it's not just about that. You actually have to go deep, ladies. We've got to go deep to get there. So, Melissa, did we miss anything really important before we start wrapping up and do our final takeaways?
I think we really hit some of the main things. This is such a topic that's passionate to me. And I'm even writing a book about this as far as nourishing a kinder, deeper connection with ourselves, right? And being more intentional because I want people to I want you to remember you, right? Keep coming back to you before you were thrown expectations and rules and obligations and responsibilities. Like, keep remembering you and where you are right now. And one of my biggest thoughts would be I'd love for each person listening to give themselves the grace and the compassion to be human, to heal, to make mistakes, to learn, and to allow ourselves to evolve and access that freedom that's available to each of us.
I love that. You know what helps me sometimes too when I'm there is to say, I know I'm a good person.
Mhm.
Like, that's just it. At the end of the day,
Yeah.
like, we are good people. You listening to this show right now, you are a good person. So when your head goes into that space, just take a minute to remind yourself of that. Write it down somewhere and go, I'm a good person, but I'm going to feel this way sometimes, but I'm a good person. So snap out of it and move it forward.
Right? I'm a good person and I deserve to be loved and to be liked and to be forgiven and accepted.
So this is like absolutely awesome. Awesome episode and a message that so many people need to hear, not just women out there, men do this too. I've got quite a few notes I've taken. Sarah, you probably have all the takeaways today, though. What do you
I
think?
don't though. Nicole, it's so funny. You're going to do all three takeaways. You have at it.
Okay, so the takeaways, I want to just put a disclaimer, are Sarah's idea, but now I'm doing them.
You do them. It's hilarious. I forget about them. And I get all involved in the story and crazy and passionate talking about this. And
Oh, I
you're
You're
like,
very
absolutely love it.
present.
So I don't think we actually said this, but it crossed my mind. And I feel like it might be a good thing to throw out there as like a precursor to takeaways, which is that we're not trying to avoid having times in our lives that make us feel uncomfortable or not great. Like we don't want to just sort of, slide through life unscathed. I mean, that's not the point. The point is that when we hit those moments that make us blame ourselves for something that happened that we're not happy with, we want to have tools to help correct that as quickly as we can so we can move ourselves on. So that's my first takeaway is like, this shit's gonna happen. So
it
let's
does,
tool up.
right?
Okay. So I'm going to kind of do a couple of bullets, just sort of with advice on what to do when you get there. The first thing is to stop and think about what emotions you're actually feeling. And if you likely move into the guilt and shame words, then you know that you are possibly in danger of falling into the guilt shame thought cycle that can never end if you don't let it, if unless you stop it. The next thing is, once you have identified that you're there, do something. I say do something physical, but snap yourself out of it. Snap your finger and be like, would I talk to my best friend this way? Would I talk to my
Like a safe
child
word.
this way?
Give
What?
yourself a safe, maybe you need like a safe word. You're
A
like, oh,
safe
feel
word.
shame.
Love it.
Yeah. A safe
Yes.
word with yourself.
Personal
I mean,
safe
why
word.
not?
Melissa.
Cool.
I'm just,
Hey.
sure. You may have a safe word. You may have a safe song. You may have a hot pink wiffle bat like I do that I go beat on furniture down in the basement during the pandemic. Whatever it is you need to do to move the energy.
Hold on.
Yes.
I'm feeling like we missed a really big part of a conversation. Did you just say a hot pink wiffle ball bat? Step with? Hold up.
Yes, I did.
Oh my
That's
God.
a conversation for another time,
Melissa,
ladies.
you didn't even tell us that was like a possibility. That's actually sounds like a much, like when I want to have compassion with myself, if I
It
can have
feels
compassion with myself or have a pink wiffle ball bat to beat things with, I'm taking the pink wiffle ball bat. I'm just
it's
saying.
awesome, I have to admit. I mean, I love chocolate too, but the hot pink wiffle ball bat has been a gift during the pandemic. I highly recommend one.
You need to send them out as a gift with purchase. Put them in like skirt orders. Be like, you're going to hit this place
You know
at some
what?
point. Here's your
I
bat.
think your husband should be happy you didn't bust that out when with him rolling down. Like, what are you going to change into? I'd be like, all right, buddy, game on.
So, okay. So after we have wiffle balled the hell out of, the negative
So choose how to move the energy.
Right.
Melissa, that was like I just have to say that was out of
that came off of
Well,
safe
you all
word,
did a
Sarah.
safe word.
You're moving into the safe word territory.
You went to a safe word.
Oh my God, I love it. I want to redo this episode starting with that because that's the real Melissa that I want to talk to.
This is all the real Melissa. There are a lot of facets here.
Well, I think Melissa's angry sometimes. And you know what? We should all be angry sometimes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. But
Okay, sorry.
So now that we have moved from the negativity bias of our brains to the positivity bias, now we've got to accept where we are and who we are at this moment. And this is something that, Sarah, you talked a lot about, but acceptance comes next. And with that would be a recognition of what I was actually aiming for that I failed at or am failing at. And that can be that thing where you peel the layers and get all the way down to the root where you're like, so was the time of the marathon really that important, or was it this, or was it this, and was it this? And at the end of the day, was it just getting there and trying my best to get to the finish line? So like recognition of the true intention. And then the final thing would be to maybe recalibrate, and through that, be patient and give yourself compassion along the way. So those are my takeaways, which is really like a 5-step process to get there.
It was a good summary.
With some S&M thrown into the middle, which
it was. I wasn't thinking that with the safe word. Is that what safe words are for?
Yeah.
Well,
we're both nodding.
Maybe a code word, but a safe word takes it to a different place.
Yeah, code word might have been a better
code word, right? Like muskrat from Meet the Parents.
Right. Perfect.
That's what I was going. I was not.
All good. We got a great laugh out of that.
going to be our most listened episode ever.
It could be.
My
You could put
God.
that in the notes. Wait for the S&M reference and bats at the end.
You got to
and
listen. Wait for it.
I
Wait
want to
for
add
it.
one other thing to our takeaways too, which is about checking it. And you said this, Nicole, but I know this is what I struggle with all the time is checking your expectations. Your should. Check your should. Like should you really be doing this? Is it really something you want to do and that you're passionate about, or is it just a way for you to be able to beat yourself up? Like take that minute and think that over. And if you don't want to do it, just take the bat to it and it'll get out of your reel. So anyways, Melissa, it has been amazing to meet you. We should do another episode where we start with the bat. And but thank you. I think this is such an important it's just such an important topic, and it's something that we don't always talk about, and that I think we all need more of. So I'm so happy to have had a chance to talk with you on this episode and meet you.
Oh,
So-
thank you for inviting me on. This has been so much fun, and I would love to come back another time and we could lead with the hot pink wiffle bat.
Fantastic.
I mean,
We'll
I think
tackle anger.
Melissa's safe word is probably breathe or something.
I don't think so. I think that's what she has on her wall, but I think there's a whole different.
Another side of her.
It's actually it's an acronym, so it stands for something there.
I know.
You know.
Oh, I'm missing on all the inside stuff. All right, we'll schedule the next episode then.
Thank
Melissa,
you.
thanks for coming on. It's awesome to see you. Great episode. All right, you guys, let's go
Good
out
luck
there
with
and
that book, Melissa.
let's go be nicer to ourselves.
Let's do.